Hi, I'm Modia Silva, and welcome to another episode of Conscious Curiosity. In this podcast, we look at consciousness and curiosity from all sorts of angles. We look at it with therapists, with neuroscientists, with occupational therapists, with psychotherapists, all sorts of therapists. And in addition, we look at it with spiritual leaders and religious leaders. And I'm honored today to be with Ralph Benmurgui, who had a long career with the Canadian Broadcast Corporation, with the CBC, both on radio and TV. He also was a host or a DJ, however he would define it, on Jazz FM, which is a radio station that I love and listen to a lot, and listen to his show a lot. And we have been friends for several decades. Ralph, in his latest incarnation, is an ordained spiritual director. And so we're going to hear during this podcast what that is, what that means for him in his life, and in particular, as he dives into how spirituality is at the root of his faith, or is his faith. Whatever that means, we'll find out. And we'll look at things like presence, being present. We'll look at life and death and the role of the ego. And we'll look at the art of the interview, because Ralph is the consummate interviewer. This podcast is a little different than most of the ones that we record here, because it isn't a standard interview format. It's not me welcoming in a guest and asking a bunch of questions and then exploring some things in more depth. Ralph has his own podcast as well, called Not That Kind of Rabbi, because, as you'll hear if you go over to his podcast, he is not that kind of rabbi. He is an ordained spiritual director, which is a different type of rabbi, a different type of teacher. And so we recorded this podcast understanding that both of us would take the content and drop it into our own particular platform. And therefore, it's more of a fireside chat, something a bit more loose, maybe more jazzy than a traditional interview. And so I invite you to sit back and enjoy. And as usual, send any comments you would like in terms of what you liked, what you didn't like, what else you would like to hear on this podcast series. And we will do our best to satisfy. Until then, please sit back and enjoy.
Great. I'll start in 5 seconds. I'll start.
It's so CBC-ish.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Ralph Benmurgui. Welcome to Not That Kind of Rabbi. Always I clarify, I am not actually a rabbi. I am an ordained spiritual director, but I'm not a rabbi. If I was a rabbi, I wouldn't be that kind of rabbi. Something I always enjoy is my rabbi friends say, "What do you mean by that?" They seem to wonder if it's a pejorative. It's not. It's that I think what I'm really dealing with in my own mind these days, I think like most people who have engaged in religion in their life, it's not, there's this perception that you're certain about things if you engage a religion, that everything is about now nailing it down. But the people that I've been fellow travelers with, I've always noticed, like myself, have an ebb and flow to their proximity or distance from either their religion or from ideas of what God is or what is good and what is bad, that these things are fluid and we move through them in our own way. And for me, it's important that spirituality be the basis of my faith. Faith itself is a loaded word. It seems to connote that same notion of certainty, but also the fundamentalist approach, people of faith. And there's a righteousness involved. You know, I remember years ago, my wife and I, we wanted to go to New York City. It was our only trip we've actually taken to Manhattan together. But we wanted to go, and it was late November, and we didn't realize that this was the highest shopping time in New York City for Christmas, and we couldn't find a hotel in Manhattan. So we ended up in Brooklyn, and we ended up in an Orthodox Jewish neighborhood because there was a primitive version of Airbnb at the time. available, and they had separate single beds in the room. And we'd ask that they move the beds together. They didn't, so we had to do it ourselves. Um, but I was surrounded by ultra Orthodox Jewish people, and I'm a Moroccan Jew, and the way we do things is as Sephardic, Spanish-speaking Jews, literally is what it means. Um, we do tradition. Orthodoxy is a whole other idea. It's not traditional Judaism. It's Orthodox Judaism. It is every letter of the book. And it was fascinating to be in this milieu. So at one point we went to get our breakfast at this local corner bagel shop that had, we wanted a bagel and cream cheese. And I was waiting in line. I ordered it, and these yeshiva kids came running in, and they all ordered their stuff. So I waited at the back for my bagels. My wife was outside looking around, and there was this young man and this older man, and they were in a conversation. And the young man was very agitated, and he was talking like this, and they threw me out of the house. They I don't know why Orthodox people talk faster, but often they do. They wanted me out of the house, and they just threw me out. And the guy's listening, and he said, "Well, what did you do?" And he said, "Well, I'm going to tell you something. This is very important that it stays between us." Loud enough for me to hear, of course. And he says, "I have a gambling problem. I've been gambling." And then he goes on, and he's self-flagellating, and I'm just dying for the guy. He's a kid, I just feel so bad for him. And the older man finally stops him when there's an appropriate moment, and he says, "Do you think you're the only person that could have a problem like this?" "Well, yeah, I don't know anybody else. No one at the yeshiva. Nobody has a." And the older man says, "I have a gambling problem." And it stunned the kid. And it made me realize that I had this bias about people who are of faith, of fundamental faith, that they're certain about everything. And then I realized that perhaps what they're trying to do is cling to a roadmap that will help them get through this life, and that they look to an exterior shell to create that protection for them. And they figure if they do everything that you're supposed to do, it might actually be a beautifully written map of life. And I just stopped judging at that point and just thought, well, like me, they're just, foolish people stumbling through their lives. So that was a wonderful thing. I just wanted to throw that insight in, because the other thing I noticed was we went to a Judaica store, and believe me, there are a lot of Judaica. Israel doesn't have as many as Brooklyn. And there were beautiful stuff in there, like the Hanukkah, the menorah, $1,700 silver menorahs. They were just lovely. But I noticed one man who was immaculate in his clothing. And I started talking to him, and I asked him about, the way he, as Reb Zalman from my tradition of Jewish renewal says, how do you get it on with God? So I asked, how do you get it on with God? And he laughed and smiled, and he said, I'm a Musar person. I'm about soul traits and the refinement of your soul traits. And one of them is order, and part of that order, and another one is honor. And part of that is to present yourself in the best possible way you can, to show respect for other people and for yourself. So that got me all interested in Musar. So that's my thing for today. I'm going to explore that with somebody who actually knows way more than I do about Musar, because he's one of the original practitioners here in Canada. And he's an old friend. And we've both traveled our own roads and kept bumping into each other on the way. So we're together now. He's got his own podcast called Conscious Curiosity, and it's Moja Silver. Moja, hi, how are you?
Yeah, I'm well, thanks. Thank you so much, Ralph.
Thank you.
Nice to be here, whatever, wherever here is.
Here, well, I'm in the middle of an Eckhart Tolle 8-week seminar on presence, on total presence.
Ah,
so here is here.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Not hey, everything I'm going to say to you is based on who I think you are from what I've known of you in the past,
right.
or what I'm hoping people will think of me in the future. I'm just here.
Nice. So here is great. Someone just asked me a question this morning about, can you dig into your past? Like, could they pick up a photo of when they were very young
Mm.
and be present in the past?
Oh, I see.
And I thought it was an interesting question because I think Eckhart Tolle probably has the answer that if you can experience the photo in the here and now while holding on to that memory, then that's presence.
Well, except there's the other part of memory, of course, which is one of the reasons why eyewitness accounts of crimes are really quite poor,
Mm,
which is we add ideas to memory and we add biases and we embellish our memory and we deny our memory. So it in and of itself doesn't exist.
right.
Only this exists.
True. That's true too.
Said like a Talmudic scholar, and that's true too.
That's true too.
On the other hand, so tell me a bit about your journey right now.
My journey right now. Or you just talked about character development. That
Yeah,
journey or my journey right now?
whatever one you want to talk
Oh,
about.
hmm. My journey right now is I was an engineer and then my career was marketing in high tech. But that was how I made money to put food on the table. But my passion was always presence, consciousness, spirituality. Just what am I doing in this world? And back in the 80s, I'd been in a Gestalt therapy group for 3 years with Harvey Friedman, who passed away just over a year ago. He was kind of like the right-hand man of Fritz Perls, the founder of modern-day Gestalt therapy. And I loved it. And that kind of kept me going outside of making money to pay for the family. And so 5 years ago, I went back to school and did a 5-year training program in Gestalt therapy. And I'm just completing a 3-year training program in trauma therapy in Peter Levine's trauma therapy called somatic experiencing. And I've been seeing clients for the last couple of years.
So can I back you up to the and I loved it? What did you love about Gestalt?
I loved, well, we just talked about presence. So I loved the here and now focus in Gestalt therapy, the focus that says, I craft all these beliefs about how I am in the world up here in my head. But once I can drop out of that and see that I'm just here and I don't have to start shaping like boundaries and I don't have to shape armor to protect me and things that hold me back, I can just be here now. And that's all that matters.
Yeah.
That got
So,
exciting. It
yeah.
woke me up. It woke me up out of my rigid, structured engineering self
Right. Right.
and said, wow, there's like a whole piece of Modia that has just been ignored. And now it's time to embrace it.
So, how did that manifest itself in the way you lived your life once you made that realization?
I helped start kind of a flaky new age community in Toronto, a Jewish renewal community.
Well, yeah, as a marketer, I think you've just sunk your product. Kind of a flaky. It's like,
Well, it was
oh,
wonderful. No, but I loved flaky. But I loved flaky.
I got to get a T-shirt that says "I love flaky."
But it's true. Like in Judaism, there are regular, very in traditional Judaism, there
Yeah,
are structured prayer services, and they're the same every day, basically, right?
yeah,
And so we would like turn that on its head and just say, like, what feels right
right.
now to express myself in this world. And then that journey took me off for a year. I left my job at the telephone company and traveled for a year, spent almost half a year in Israel contemplating whether to become a rabbi, but not that kind of rabbi.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah. And what? So, what was that? What was the conversation inside you about rabbi, no rabbi?
I think the conversation was that I wanted to explore who I was in the world and help others explore who they were in the world in like a non-judgmental, open, accepting way. And it became really difficult to be in yeshiva, in religious seminary, because that wasn't the mindset of the people in those days, or maybe even now.
Right.
And so it was a really, really painful time to be there, to recognize that I thought being a rabbi was going to be the way to do that, to achieve
Right.
that.
Right.
And then coming up against, no, it's not. I'm the only guy in the seminary who's not wearing a white shirt and a black jacket. And
Right.
yeah,
So this wasn't a reform or conservative. This was an Orthodox yeshiva.
it was Orthodox, and then I even dipped into like a Hasidic
Yeah.
yeshiva. Yeah.
Well, the Jewish Renewal Movement, when I became a spiritual director, I'm keeping in mind the conscious curiosity that you're doing now as a spiritual director. That renewal movement, which is much more vibrant in the United States than it is here in Canada. There's an organization here, Aleph Canada. Cheryl Gilbert, the rabbi in Montreal, is leading that. But what we like to call woohoo Judaism, I manifest now in something called the Jewish Men's Retreat, JMR, which is part of an organization I belong to called Menschwerk for Jewish men. And there, rabbis like two Canadian rabbis actually who are in the States, Sean Zevitt
Mm-hmm.
From Mishkan Shalom in Philadelphia, Mark Biller, who is in New York State.
Right. I know both those guys.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is Nadia Gross, great rabbi teachers, but it was really an experiential and spiritually based, like I said in the opening, just for me, I try to talk to people about the fact that spirit is about relationship. And religion is about, I always call it a fitness program. If you want to get a six pack, you got to do the crunches, right? So Sabbath is one of those things that you can say, I'll hang my hat on a Friday night, Saturday experience. If the whole world did Sabbath, our greenhouse gas emissions would be down 7% immediately. Put it that way, right? If we all just
Right.
knocked it off one day a week and just were
being
and not doing, we'd actually be somewhere. So you
can I go back a little bit?
Yeah.
What you just said. So you just said spirit is about relationship.
Yeah.
And it really it hit home because it's a beautiful statement. Can you say more about what spirituality is for you? Because you're a spiritual counselor, right? Or is
Right.
Is that
Yeah.
designation?
Yeah. Well, it's spiritual director, which is horrible. It makes it sound like you have a clipboard and you're going, your neshama goes over there and your neshama goes. No, it doesn't work like that. I think for a lot of people, you have to sort of back up to what religion isn't doing for a lot of people. And I have lots of rabbi friends who are perfectly aware of this conundrum of the hollowing out of the rituals themselves. So the difference would be, there's to get into the weeds for a moment as an example. There's a prayer that's said every Saturday, and there's always a kid who comes up to do it. He goes up to the lectern, the bima, and then we sing back, and it's so cute. You just want to shrivel up at that point. It's lovely, right? But then you take someone like Shefa Gold in the United States, and Aviva Chernik does a beautiful version of this in Canada. And you take the first line without the last word, and you go from Ashrei Yoshvei Veitecha, Odi Halu Hasela, to Ashrei Yoshvei Veitecha, Odi Halu Odi Hallelujah. And you repeat that for 5 minutes. So now you're sitting in the pocket of a spiritual experience, as opposed to, and it's very comforting to sing the same songs in a church or in a synagogue or in a mosque week after week or in a Gurdwara. It is very comforting. But if you ask people, what's your prayer experience? What are you getting? Most of the people I speak to are in prayer crisis. The only prayer they can do is not what they need. So there's the connection to the fact that don't have a soul, you are a soul. And there's a spiritual connection, and spirit is, I always go to Martin Buber, to I and thou, a sacred relationship. If I can see the divine spark in you and you can see it in me, if I can see that There is no, you're not in the universe. You are the universe. You are the stardust that makes this place up.
Right. So
Right?
I don't know if you know, but Martin Buber and I and Thou is like a central pillar of Gestalt therapy.
Beautiful.
Is phenomenal. It's really the relational piece of Gestalt therapy. And so for me, when I sit with a client, I see the I see the thou, but I actually then am challenged to see the co-created space in between the and.
Right.
So it's I and thou, and the and becomes the thing that I get more curious about. Is like, how have we co-created this thing in the middle?
Right. It's like Christ talks about whenever two or more are together, I am there.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
There's an elevation
Right.
by, and which is why the pandemic is so difficult, because our ability to connect to each other has been compromised. There's an element of fear instilled in people that's counterintuitive. I see you on the sidewalk, I walk to the other side of the sidewalk.
Mm-hmm.
I see my grandchild, I wave at them on the porch,
Uh-huh.
right?
More than, yeah. So more than that, I when I cross the road because I see you coming, because
mm,
I'm afraid of COVID, I also feel my body tighten. I
right,
shrink. And so, when you were chanting before, you just gave it so much more space, so much more time, like time and space.
right, right.
And for me, it's like that extra time and space is where I can now settle in to my spirit or to my spirituality.
That's right. So the contemplative art, um, you know, it's only 30 years ago, I guess, when Aryeh Kaplan, the Jewish rabbi, spoke about Jewish meditation,
Mhm.
because it wasn't considered part of the tradition. But every major religion in their fitness program has a contemplative piece, right? Without it, without reflection and without stillness. And one of the problems I have sometimes with our religion and others as well is when the cleric is in their head,
Mm,
where they can tell you how many angels on the head of a pin.
right.
But when their congregant comes up to them and says, I, I, I lost my job and I don't know what to do anymore. And they're staring at them, and the lovely people, they mean well, but they're like, I've had several rabbis in my own orbit who just go, I don't know what to, I'm going to send them to you.
Uh-huh.
I don't know what to do, because that's a different kind of, that's a different aspect that is much more about a spiritual, like we just said, that sacred to sacred, heart to heart, holy listening,
Mhm.
right? So tell me more about how Gestalt instills that I and thou into the process. How would it work if I'm the client?
Gestalt is actually is kind of a bottom up therapy. So it's not let's figure out what you're thinking and start to fix your thinking.
Right.
Really, what is the full experience of body, heart, and mind in relation with you? And so you might come and say, I lost my job. I don't know what to do. I can't even tell my partner. I can't
Right.
tell my
Right.
friends, whatever. And then I would just feel into that. And I look for resonance. I try to resonate with the energy that person, that the client is putting out. I attune to their energy field, and then that opens me up to be empathic.
Wait, how do you tune to an energy field? It sounds great, but how do you
Yeah.
actually get there?
Um, I don't want to be coy about it, but it was kind of like years of training. So
Right.
I was in I was in a Buddhist community for 12 years, and so I developed meditation skills. I've been in Gestalt training for years, somatic experiencing. I try and get out of my head. So
Right.
I use my breath a lot. I'll ground myself however I want to ground myself, by pushing my feet into the floor, by feeling my back against the back of the chair, whatever techniques I use to really settle into the space. And then I just reach out energetically to say, what am I sensing right now? And then I'll share that sometimes. So let's say I feel sadness. Someone just said they lost their job, and I feel sadness come up in me. So I
Right.
feel it physically in my body. Maybe it's like up here in my chest or around my heart. I don't know at that moment whether that's my stuff that I'm bringing from my past or whether I'm actually resonating with the client. So I'll check it out and I'll say, I feel sadness right now. How are you? Like, what's going on for you?
Right. Right. Right.
And, maybe like 60, 70% of the time, I feel I've connected and resonated or attuned. And they'll go, yeah, I really feel that sadness. And then the sadness is now just sitting there between the two of us. And we can be with that sadness and hold the space for it.
Can you do it on Zoom?
I find it harder, to be honest,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but yes, I find it harder because I think, I actually haven't thought about this until just now. I think when I see Zoom, I see a computer screen, and I think technology, and I think fast, and I gotta move. I gotta move, move, move.
Wow. Wow. Yeah.
I'm so glad you asked that question because I had not thought of that.
Yeah. That's interesting. That whole uh, environment that computers are about is it's like we used to go to dinner parties and somebody would say, I think the show Alf was on for 8 years, and
Uh-huh.
someone goes, no, Alf was on for like 3 years. And then you'd argue about it because neither of you had a way to prove it. And today, it's just the second it's a debate, the phones whip out.
Mm.
How many seasons was Alf? Four seasons. It's just like all mystery. So,
Mhm. Which is back to what you just said before about religion versus spirituality.
right.
That now you can just go to IMDb or whatever,
Yeah.
or Siri, or right. How
Yeah.
long was Alpha on? And in religion, you just flip open a book and you go, "What's the answer?"
Well, I don't know if I totally agree with that because I think good religion is what's the question,
Mm.
not what's the answer. Because you can take a Torah portion or a chapter in the New Testament, and any person doing a sermon on that can draw and discern things out of it. And it's the 40th time they've done this with the same chapter,
Right.
this portion, because in it there are questions. So if I read about Pharaoh hardening his heart, you and I could have entirely different things to say about that and different questions to ask about why would you, knowing that everyone is suffering, still do this? And then I could say, well, on the other hand, why would a government, knowing that climate change is real and the breakdown of our climate will be the poisoned gift to our children, how can they harden their heart and say, it's about jobs?
Mm.
And then I could take another way of doing the sermon and say it's a metaphor. We have our own Pharaoh in our heart, in our life, and it's a tyrannical force in our life. I must succeed. I must do this. I must get rich. I must get a Lexus. You know?
Mhm. So if you have Pharaoh in your heart, like
Oh
we all
yes,
do,
yes.
what question would you ask your Pharaoh?
What is it that you actually want?
Hmm.
Right? Because we're, Buddhists talk about a skillful life or an unskilled life, a skilled life or an unskilled life. And often what we want, if we discern, I think, is something good, something really good. How we get there in an unskilled way usually means it's not going to work out very well,
Uh-huh.
right? I want a better relationship with my wife. Therefore, I want her to stop doing this and stop doing that and stop doing this and stop doing that, and then we'll have a great relationship. Well, I've just, peed in the pool. It's not going to happen.
Right. So it's all. And do you think it's anything more than relationship? When you say, I want good. Do you think it can all be boiled down to, I want to find my place in the world in a relational way?
Well, there's so many layers, right? So the Tolle things I've been listening to have been very informative about ego.
Hmm.
And the more I tell people I am Ralph Benmurgui, and
Uh-huh.
do you know who Ralph Benmurgui is? What do you mean you don't remember I had a TV show? And what kind of a person are you? My ego is resisting being here and present in this manifestation. And I've put on, as Ramdas would say, I've put on a spacesuit with a name tag that says Ralph Benmurgui on it.
Right.
And Ralph Benmurgui doesn't drink red wine, he drinks white wine. And Ralph Benmurgui doesn't do this, he does that. So the ego and the fear that is instilled in our egoic struggle perverts our true heart and perverts our ability to see clearly the other person and to see ourselves and to see our connection to the universe, because that's the spiritual conversation for me.
Right. Me too. And the example I give is sometimes I'll ask someone who I know has children. I say, how many kids do you have? And they'll go, well, I've got one, two, three, four, whatever it is. I go, really? You have children? They're yours? Isn't that an egoistic statement?
Yeah. It's like the difference between pet owner and pet companion.
Right.
Yeah, but it's rewarded. I mean, the whole way we've created a material society that is more and more consumptive and neoliberal, the harder it is to find a spiritual center. I remember when they got rid of Sunday shopping
Oh
in
yeah.
Canada, and this being what 83% Christian, this country.
Mm.
At the time, I just thought, what'd you do that for? I mean,
Mhm.
it's not even my Sabbath, and yet you just gave up a day where everybody had the day off, where people didn't have to go work for the weekend, where they could actually hang out with their family. What'd you do that for? Right? So for me, if we don't create sacred space in our lives, and if we don't create sacred space in being present, walking down a street and actually accessing our true self, not the one we've constructed for everyone's edification or out of fear. If we
Mhm.
take off the goalie equipment
Right.
and just walk down the street, we'll actually notice the different species of tree on our street.
Mm.
Right? We'll notice that house hasn't been painted in a while, but that one, oh, look what they did.
Right.
We'll
So it's
notice our fingers are getting colder at the tip because
yeah.
we're present, right? So then ask a person once they're present questions that you ask them when they're not present, you'll get completely different answers.
Right. That's beautiful. And we've been dancing around this, um, kind of coming up with the same answer each time in terms of time and space, that it's giving space and time to everything around you, which I would call support. It's finding support for you to be in the world, but it's also finding the space and time within you
Hmm.
so that you recognize your internal supports.
Yeah, I had a client who had been given a 9-minute curriculum for stress reduction,
Okay.
three 3-minute things to do in a day. And God love her, she was too busy. And I actually totally understood what she meant.
Right.
Oh yeah, no, I don't have time, because believe me, the challenges are real, and her time, it's about caring for others, and it's enormous.
Mhm.
But I said, so I just repeated it to her. You don't have 9 minutes in a day to do this. And she paused and then she went, well, when you put it like that. And yet I'm her. I'm no different, and
Right.
as and when you counsel people or attempting to have healing relationships with anyone in your life, you have to be, I think, good at being a wounded healer
Mm.
and not a righteous healer. Right?
Right.
The warning bells for me is when I see the righteous cleric, the righteous healer. I remember I had a bad back in my early 40s. Everyone I went to told me the last person I went to was wrong.
Uh-huh.
Oh, you went to an osteopath. Well, they don't know anything. I'm a naturopath. Let me do. Oh, no, no, you're a naturopath. No, no, you got to be with a doctor. Come on, a real doctor. Don't mess it. And I just thought, do you not realize what you're doing to me? Each one of you is telling me that you're the only one with an answer and that I've been wasting my time in chronic pain.
Hmm.
And so they were righteous healers,
Right, right.
right?
I, w-
Orthodoxy,
I
right?
wonder if you want a blend. So when you say righteous and wounded, wounded for me hits me in my body, and righteous takes me up to my head.
Right.
And I wonder
And your ego,
into my right, right.
right? Wounded allows for vulnerability.
Wounded also allows for my body to have a voice, and so that my ego head, like my mind, isn't just controlling absolutely everything that goes on with me as well.
Yeah, the body tells the story, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Right. And yet we pretend the body has nothing to do with it. I'm doing a lot of work with aging right now, and what do people the go-to for aging is physical.
Hmm.
Hip replacement. Everyone's going to have Alzheimer's. No, actually, 1 in 10 people is going to have Alzheimer's. 70% of them are going to be women. Like, your fear is of decrepitude, and the declinist view of getting old is about physical. I have lots of physical things at my age. I'll be 65 in a week. I have lots of things at my age that are not going the way I wanted them to physically, but I have lots of other things that are. The fact that I'm cogent is pretty good,
Right, right.
but I have to I have to see them more as uh, I guess it's more God wrestling than hiding in a corner hoping nothing else happens. You know.
I think it's compassionate acceptance is what's missing. It's like I have a friend in Vancouver who's a palliative care physician,
Mm.
and I asked her if she'd be willing to talk about it, and she said it's really difficult to talk about such holy work. I was like, wow, that's like it just struck me so hard. It was like that's such a beautiful thing to
Yeah.
realize that her work isn't to think about should this person have a hip replacement.
Or how much more morphine today?
Right, right. But it's like it's holy work to help them come to a level of acceptance of where they are.
You know, Stephen Jenkinson,
No.
Canadian, wrote a book called Die Wise.
Okay.
And he was a palliative care guy for like 25 years on Hospital Row and University Avenue in Toronto. Um, but he says some beautiful and brilliant things about our death phobic society and how we, at this point now, with technologies and legislations, we don't want to do the dying part. We
Right.
just want to be dead.
Right.
Like,
So,
don't let me suffer. Just let me die. Now, it's easy for me to say because nobody's told me this week that I'm terminal.
mm,
So my fear isn't up. It has been. I've had illnesses that have made me thought, ooh, this could be it. And a lot of people, as they get any age, people in their 50s get all kinds of issues, right?
right.
But that's not what's at play here. It's, as he says, it is not about, life is not about the human lifespan. Human lifespan is a moment in life,
Uh-huh. Nice.
right? Like, look
Nice.
at it differently. Look at
Right.
this as a continual flow of creative and relentless energy, which is what I think God is. I don't think God's Santa Claus, a guy with a naughty and nice list and a beard, which is what we get told in Hebrew school and in religious school, and that just turns people. The moment you're an adolescent, you think that's ridiculous, and you walk away. But I think that it's more. We are just the drop in the ocean in the drop, right?
Hmm.
And that we're just part. The humility is to see that, which reminds me by saying the word humility.
Yeah. Oh, yes. We're going to talk about Musa, right?
Yes, I wanted to pick your brain about
But can I,
Musar.
but before you do that,
Yes, of course,
going
of
to put a
course.
wrap on it is there's this beautiful video of Ramdas after he'd had his stroke,
Right,
or after
right.
he was stroked, as he says,
Yeah,
where he was rushed into hospital and he thought he was so enlightened and he was ready to meet his maker or meet, whatever on the other side of the curtain. And he remembers being pushed down, like raced down the corridors and looking up from his bed. And all he saw was the pipes the water pipes, the gas pipes, whatever pipes they were of the hospital. And he just was completely caught in the engineering and the physical nature of those pipes. And it really threw him off because he thought, well, I've really got this spirituality thing sorted out. And then he realized he didn't. And I think for me, it's not whether you've got it sorted out, but it's like how, like whatever belief system you hold to, can you hold it loosely? Like, can you hold that frame loosely?
Right.
Because the tighter and tighter you hold the frame and say, I've got it sorted out, the more the ego puffs up.
To be uncertain is uncomfortable. To be
Yeah.
certain is ridiculous.
And to be uncomfortable triggers your nervous systems and makes you even more uncomfortable.
Right. So that whole piece we talked about at the beginning about certainty, about,
Right.
Religion and being about certainty. It isn't. The kid was a gambler and so was the guy. It's the way it goes, right?
Right.
It's just an attempt at having a meaningful life. Going to engaging in Buddhism is an attempt to have a meaningful life. It's not like I have to become a Buddhist, but the ego part of us, you and I, we're the kind of people who go, well, then I guess I should be a rabbi. I guess I should be a Buddhist master. And it's just like, oh, for God, can't you just do this? Does it have to turn into something all the time?
Right. Does Ralph and Modius swing off the bench?
Yeah. Look who thinks he's nothing. Yeah. All right. Musar.
Okay, yes, Musar.
Could you please give a brief description to folks who've never heard that word before? I say Musar, you say
Musar. What? Oh, should I be saying potato instead of potato?
No. So tell me, what does it mean?
So Musar is a path of self-growth that comes out of 18th century Eastern Europe, the Litvak Jewish community.
Yes.
And there was a recognition that that people were embroiled in their religious studies and they were losing sight of who they were in those studies. And so there were some great architects of this tradition called Musar who said we need to actually start focusing on character development as well as academic development or Torah development.
Right.
And so these schools of Musar started. The most famous person, although there were rabbis before him, but the most famous one is Yisrael Salanta, who was born, I think, around 1810. So that's the early 19th century. And by about the 1830s, 1840s, had established these schools of Musar. And they would bring these yeshiva boys together, and it was just essentially boys at this time,
Right.
who would come together with a master, and they would be schooled in how to become a better person. And so they'd look at things like humility and joy and arrogance and anger and all the things that make us up, and say, where are you now on the dial, and how would you like to turn the dial either up or down on a particular character strength?
Right. So, for instance, if I understand in any way, because you've studied this much more thoroughly than I have. So compassion, that compassion has two poles to it. One is strength, and the other one is loving kindness.
Right. So
go too far over one or the other, and you throw it out of balance. And the point in the middle is the Bechira. Is that right?
Bechira.
Yeah. So the Bechira would be, can you balance these two? So you need your strength for compassion, but you also need to have a loving kindness. There's not one or the other. Is that right?
So yes, but there isn't one Bechira point. There's a Bechira point for you, and for each individual, it might be different.
Okay.
So the balance. So objectively, you might say you had loving kindness at one end and strength at the other side, right? So you might see someone's point of balance here and someone else's here, and you might want to jump in with your ego and go, well, you guys have it wrong. It should be in the middle.
Right.
But but it might be a perfect point of balance for that person.
Right. So they might need more of their strength to be compassionate, or they might need more of their loving kindness to be compassionate,
Right.
or they might need the 50-50, but nobody's 50-50, right?
It could be. No, they could be.
Could be. Yeah.
Right. So, and you may go, and you may think because of the way we're raised by our culture or religion or or parents or whoever, caregivers, that, oh, loving kindness, yeah, you can never have enough of that. And it's like, oh, so in Musa land, you'd say, so if I give all my money away to poor people, to people who've experienced homelessness and so on, that would be a full expression of loving kindness. And the answer would be no, because then you'd have nothing left to put bread on the table for your family.
Right. Right.
So you have to constantly go up, back up and say, am I holding to a fixed view, or am I doing something that really serves me and helps me find that balance in the best way?
So could you use Musar in counseling? This is what I'm
Yeah,
thinking of these days.
yeah. So I had a client who has a really hard time touching into their anger. And for me, the expression of anger into violence is horrible, is a no-no. But anger as an emotion is beautiful. It's energy. It's something that says I'm alive. And then the question is, how do I then use it out in the world in a righteous way, in a good way, right? The client could not accept that they had any level of anger at all until I went to a Musar idea, which is everything's on a continuum, as you just said before, with our previous example. So with anger, I've got rage at one end, and then I've got anger, and then I've got frustration, and then all the way at the other end, I've got eye rolling. So eye rolling is a really small version of anger.
Microaggression.
A micro,
Yeah.
a micro. Once I was able to point that out, that everything's on a continuum, they were like, oh my gosh, yes, then yes, I recognize that I have anger as well. I just call it frustration, or I call it eye rolling.
Right.
And then it gave us a door, it kind of cracked the door open a little bit to do more work around their anger.
Turning on heel and leaving the room is anger.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just like, I've had it with this, but you're not raging. So you're afraid of rage, I would assume, in that context too, that I'll lose control of myself. So this is a way to kind of balance, but to also see that so for instance, humility in Musar, I always find this fascinating. Right. Because it to me, it's about humility. When we use it in our language, it's, oh, don't mind me. Standing's good. I just wanted to look at you. I'm fine.
Right. I'm not that good. I'm not like,
Yeah.
Could you play something on the piano? It's like, no, I'm not.
Yeah, and I don't want to show off. I'm fine. I'm fine. But instead, it's knowing what place to inhabit in a situation or in your life. That there are times that your humility says, I need to lead in this situation. And other times where it says, I need to defer in this situation. It's having the humility to know what's appropriate for you in this situation. Is that a fair assumption? Or
it is. And I would add one extra thing as well, which is going back to what we keep pointing towards about relationality, that it's recognizing how you came to be a good pianist, that whether if you have God in your life, then God gave you those gifts. If you have people in your life, great teachers and so on, then they give you the power and the energy and the gift to be a good pianist. And so, yes, I'm a good pianist, but it's not just about me and my ego. It's about how I relate to the world and recognize that I'm receiving as much as I'm giving when I sit down and hit those ivories.
Right.
So you've been a TV celebrity, you've been a radio celebrity. I also listen to you as a DJ or a host on Jazz FM.
Right.
How, like right now, if this is an interview, if we're calling this an interview, how does it feel different for you than when you were interviewing, whoever on the couch back in those days?
Well, interviewing is a different thing. For me as an interviewer, I have a deep sense of spiritual responsibility in an interview. It is not a secular activity to me.
That's amazing. That's what I was asking, I think, about where your spirit sits in an interview. I think you
Right. So it's wholly listening no matter where you're doing it, right? Honoring people doesn't mean that so I had a guy on my podcast who was saying things about climate change, like the sun's thermostat is broken. It's not us. We got nothing to do with it. I've spent 15 years in the environmental movement in one way or another. But what did I do? First, I sort of half gasped because it was just so overwhelming that somebody would say something like this. But then I just drew them out. Like in good conflict resolution, you become more curious, conscious curiosity. If you're a Trump supporter and I'm not, instead of trying to wing you and beat you, so what is it about Trump that really attracts you?
Right.
Well, he's bringing back jobs. Do you know which jobs he's bringing back? Well, the economy's roaring. I mean, the stock market is up, up, up. Do you tell me why you think the stock market being up is good for you? Right? And you're not trying to embarrass somebody. If you really believe these things, then you probably don't understand that, for instance, because 50% of the stock market is owned by 1% of the population. So it's hardly a barometer of how the economy is doing. And yet every media outlet will tell you what the Dow Jones is up, the NASDAQ is up, the yen is worth. What are you talking about? You're talking about in hieroglyphics about nothing for people's lives, right? So, and that's the other thing. I truly believe that our responsibilities are being abdicated to educate ourselves, to actually, read a book, turn off that thing, read a book, like a real book about a topic. I don't care if it supports my point of view or not, but read one.
Right.
Get some thoughts into your system that you can struggle with.
So that, I think, I know we're coming to the end. You said it is wrap up time.
Yes, it is wrap up.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is a great segue, what you just said, into what I like to do at the end of my podcast is I'd like to ask you 3 questions.
Go right ahead.
Yeah. The first question, where are my questions? There you go. I'm going to have to make
some. The Lord did not want you to ask me these questions. Okay,
it's true. It's true. So the first question is, because you were just talking about read a book.
Yeah.
Are you reading a book right now?
I always read several books at the same time. Okay. So I'm rereading 20 years later, Everyday Holiness, the Musar book from Alan
Marinis, which I have to say I think is probably the best written book in English on Musar. If anyone's looking for what's the one book on Musar to read, I actually think Everyday Holiness by Alan Marinis. And
don't think I didn't notice your name being there in the thanks, by the way. I picked up on that, my friend. So I'm reading that. I am wading through on Kindle, much to my chagrin, because if I'd seen it as a book, I wouldn't have read it. Martin Gilbert's Winston Churchill biography. So that's just easy. I love history, so it's an easy read because the other stuff is denser. And I'm reading. I was reading, and I've kind of put it down. The Hindu philosophy of Advaita Vedanta, which is what a lot of Tolle's work is based on, that idea of absolute presence. But it's written in scriptural and rhetorical form, so it's hard to have. I get it. You're hitting me over the head with it, but it was good to wade into it. And yeah, so those are 3 right now. But
okay.
I'm also in a book club, so we end up reading. I just read From the Ashes, which is a Canadian book, Métis writer, very good.
Very nice. Okay, question 2.
2.
That was just question 1.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have this little book,
Yes.
and on every page, there's a different question.
Okay.
So I'm going to flip through. You tell me when to stop.
Stop.
Okay. So the last person actually had the very same question. So can I flip to the next page?
Oh,
Do you want this,
fine.
or do you want this one?
No, that's where you landed. We have to
Okay.
do the question.
Okay.
And then you can compare the answers.
Right. You sound so religious right now. No, that's where we landed. We have to do the question.
I'll take that as a pejorative on the religion thing.
Yeah.
Continue.
Okay. If what's in your dreams wasn't already inside of you, how could you even dream it?
You couldn't.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. That's the answer. And the third question, because I cannot find my questions, and my brain these days, given my age, kind of slips things,
I hear you.
is what would you like the third question to be?
When are we going to rise and awaken ourselves to the reality that's not just this present moment, but this present moment for this entire planet?
Wow. Wow. Very nice. So could we leave it at that? Because as you said earlier, sometimes questions are more important than answers.
I always believe questions are more important than answers. Whenever I think I have an answer, it's like I look over my shoulder and think, hey, wait a minute.
Right.
This thing's rigged. All right. So I'll say my goodbye. You say your goodbye. So my goodbye, I always end my show often with a blessing. So I'll have a blessing for you. So Moja, my blessing for you in remembrance of beginning to bump into you when we both had different lives than the ones we have now, and different families than the ones we have now. Now we have bigger. My blessing is to honor the journey, the authenticity of your journey, the desire to heal yourself and those around you with your gifts, and the sincerity with which you lead your life. So I bless you for that, and I bless your children and your wife and all those people who have loved you and who you love.
Thank you. That's really, I got it in. And once we end this podcast, I have to sit for a little while and let it kind of pinball bounce around inside, because that was really beautiful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Ralph, thank you so much for sharing all you are. Our knowing each other and friendship goes back, I think, decades.
Yeah.
Decades. And it's really been sweet to spend this time with you and hear about you as a spiritual non-director. Maybe that's what you should be called. I'm a spiritual non-director, because you're not directing, you're just being and sharing
Move that over here, a little to the left.
Yeah, that your presence is really wonderful to be with, and it's been a pleasure. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.